Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar. Before Mr. Yu Yong Hong, our Head of Sales for Safety, gives his opening message, we'd like to make a few announcements. If you encounter any visual and audio problem during the webinar, please close the webinar and join the session again using the link that was sent to you in the email confirmation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the question box in the menu bar to type in your questions. We will answer all the questions at the Q&A session after the speakers' presentations. So without further ado, I shall now hand over the time to Mr. Yu to give his opening message. Mr. Yu.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on Dräger Tube application. We are honored that you have taken the time to listen to this webinar. And today we have the privilege to listen to Mr. Agus, who is our product manager, and he is actually responsible for developing and looking after the different application for the Dräger Tube. And today, of course, we will be focusing on the Dräger Tube application, especially in the shipping industry. We hope that this seminar will actually be a platform that you will gain new knowledge. And of course, towards the end of the webinar, there will be a time of Q&A. And please feel free to drop in the questions, and then we will indeed want to answer those queries, and so that to make this webinar a more fruitful session. And without much delay, I would like to now invite our colleague, Agus, to begin his presentation. Agus.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yu. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome for this webinar session. My name is Agustiyanto. You can call me Agus in short. So today, this will be the agenda that I'll be covering through for this webinar. So this is the agenda that we will be covering through. So today we will look into the introduction of the Dräger tube itself. So in this introduction, I will share about how the tubes are being created, the little bit history about the tubes itself, and also the types of tubes that commonly used in the shipping industry. This section will give you some background as well as the technology of the tubes being used. Next, we look into the guideline of the shipping industry. So we look into the different type of vessels, the gauge measurement of those vessels itself. Then we look into the pump systems. So the pump system over here, we probably will talk about the manual pump as well as the automatic pump. Over in this section, I will also share some updates regards to the pump system itself. So next, we look into the Aerotest systems. So the Aerotest systems is where something is very useful in terms of shipping guideline. Aerotest system is also part of our Dräger Tubes solutions as well. So last but not least, we also will going through the taking of measurements and reading the tip section. So in this section itself, customers who are already using our products and our pump itself, so you can take this opportunity as a refresher course. For our new customers who have not been who have not used our pump, you can take this opportunity to know and understand how tubes has been used and our pumps has been used and how easy to use this our Dräger tubes and pump. So before we end to our Q&A session, we will have a quiz at the back. So I hope that people will participate in this quiz. We will give a little bit premium to those who answer the quiz correctly. So the quiz questions were based on the content that I had covered. So the key takeaway, just like what Mr. Yu has mentioned, we hope that everyone will benefit from this webinar. So we hope that people understand the Dräger Tube solutions that meets safety guideline in shipping industry, as well as to understand how easy to take measurements with our tube and pump systems. So let's look into the introduction of Dräger tubes. So before we go into the history of the tubes itself, let's look into the different types of measurements, gas measurements. We have gas detectors and tubes for spot measurements. These two itself actually they serve the same purpose of spot measurement. So understanding the difference will give you a little bit of why sometimes in some scenario tubes are being preferred. So let's look at the first one. So for alarms and warning systems, gas detector itself, they provides alarm, visual audio alarm as well as visual warning. But for the tubes itself, it does not provide you alarm and warning systems. Next, we look into the simultaneous measurement. So for gas detectors, there are single and multiple gas. So for the multiple gas detectors, yes, you can equip up to multiple sensors that can detect up to 7 gases. For example, the XS8000 But for the tubes itself is actually meant for single measurement and detection. But we do have simultaneous test kit that can do a simultaneous measurement, such as the fumigation kit. This measurement itself is a semi-quantitative measurements. Next, we look into the reading of measurement in dark areas. So for the gas detector itself, yes, you can read gas detector in the dark areas, but for tubes, no, you require adequate lighting system to look into these measurements. Next, we look into the calibration requirement. In this area aspects, tubes, you do not have any calibration interval requirements, because the tubes and the manual pump itself, tubes is actually pre-calibrated at the factory level. But for the gas detectors, yes, we require calibration interval. Next, we look into the X approval. For the gas detector itself, yes, we require the X approval. But for the tubes and the manual pump, no, you don't need to require any X approval. Last but not least, we look into the measuring range. So for the gas detectors, the sensors, sometimes due to the limitation of the insensitivity, the range is quite limited. But if you look into the tubes itself, we offer quite a wide range of measuring range. For example, to a very low detection limit of 0.2 ppm for H2S, to a high concentration of the H2S up to 40% volume. In this scenario itself, let's say if you look into the spot measurement, tubes provide two key area of advantage. One is actually flexibility. So for tubes itself, you can actually use the tubes any point of time. You don't need to require any power source, because the tubes and the manual pump doesn't require any power source. And the tubes itself is pre-calibrated, so you don't need to do any maintenance, except that the gas detector you require any to do any calibrations. So another key area that tubes is actually more advantage is the selectivity. So the tubes actually provide a wide range to detect various toxic gas, and also the tubes itself offer a wide range of the measuring range from a very low to a very high concentration range. So let's look into the history of the tubes. So the first tube detector patent is created in the US by American Lamb and Hoover. The first tubes is to detect carbon monoxide. So they use the mixture of iodine pentoxide and sulfuric acid in a glass tube. So this, when contact with carbon monoxide, it will discolor the mixture. So thus, this chemical reaction, it becomes the basic principle of a tube detector. So the first tube is actually qualitative detection. So it's not yet a quantitative measurement. So today, Dräger tubes provide quantitative results with high degree of accuracy and selectivity. Since the development of the first Dräger tubes more than 75 years ago, Dräger tubes expanded the product line, and Dräger tubes belong to traditional line of products of Dräger. So in comparison with the first detector tubes patent, if you look at the shapes and the structure of the tube, it may appear to be similar. However, close inspection reveals the contents have changed dramatically. So what is Dräger tube? It's actually a valve that contains chemical preparation that react with measured substances by changing color. So to achieve the normal shelf life of 2 years, the tube tips are fused at both ends. Thus, this creates an inert atmosphere for the reagent systems. So most of the Dräger tubes are scale tubes, and the length of stain discoloration is an indication of concentration of the measured substances. So let's look at the type of tubes used in the shipping and marine industry. First of all, we look into the single layer. So single layer, what you see over here is actually, it contains the indicative layer. Next, we look at the multiple layer. So multiple layer design you will have a pre-layer, and then the lower section is actually the indicative layer. So next, we have these two tube systems and the Ampoule tubes. So a brief understanding of this type of tubes will help to understand the mechanism on how these tubes works. So the short-term tubes are designed for spot measurement at a particular location over a relatively short period of time. So let's look into the single layer. So for single layer, it's actually quite clear. So it actually contains the indicative layer. So the indicative layer is where the chemical fillings are inside, and that's where the chemical reaction will form the discoloration. So the length of stain indication is where you look into the indication of the concentration. So for example, the benzene 5C or the hydrogen sulfide 0.2A. So next we look into the multiple layer. So multiple layer, you will have a pre-layer in the upper section. So for example, the benzene 0.25, you had a pre-layer. So what's the function of the pre-layer? So the function of the pre-layer is actually to absorb moisture. Some cases, the reagent system is quite sensitive to high moisture level. So that's the reason why the pre-layer is used to absorb the moisture. Secondly, it can be used to convert the substances to a measurable substances. Sometimes when you look into the Dräger Tubes product sheet informations, you will see some, those with multiple layer will see some chemical principle and reaction. So that you probably will see a few lines that where they convert the substances to a measurable substances where the indicative layer itself will have a discoloration show to the known concentration. Next, actually the next function of the pre-layer is to trap the interference substances. So it act like a net. So some substances itself may be introduced cross sensitivity to the reagent system. So the pre-layer is act as a net to trap these interference substances. So this is the discoloration that you will see with these two tubes itself. So next, we look at the two tube systems. So we have these two tube systems. You have the pre-tube. So the pre-tube, the function is very similar to the pre-layer functions. So if you look into the formaldehyde tube itself, so in order to use these tubes, you have to break both tips of the tube itself before you connect with the rubber tubing. So next, these Ampoule tubes. So these Ampoule tubes is quite common, especially in the shipping industry, where you, for example, the Manhattan 20/A. So the reason why the design of this tube itself is due to the chemical incompatibility of some agents. They have to be kept separately before the actual measurement take place. So for example, for Manhattan 20/A, so let's say if you perform the required 10 pump strokes, the reagent ampoule must be broken. So you break this ampoule, right, using the tube cell, looking at the two dot line, two black dots, break in the middle. So when you break, right, the liquids of the ampoule will transfer to the indicative layer and carefully drawn through the pump itself. So after completing the measurements, wait for the time measuring time prior to evaluation. So the tube itself, we do have a few design. We also have two ampoule tube design where you have upper section and lower section of ampoule. So do look into the instruction manual to understand how you should take a measurement. For example, for the two ampoule tube design, the upper section is where you need to break before you do any measurements, and then you break the lower section. So if unclear, please look into the instruction manual for more details. So next, we look into the guideline of a shipping industry. So over here, right, once you understand the technology between the tips itself, we look into the guideline. So over here, we look into various vessels. We look into different type of vessels and what do we measure. So we look into different kind of gas measurement. In today's session, we will not go through every single one of them. We will go through some vessels, different type of vessels, and we also take references from ISCOT from OCMF as well as IMO. So let's look at the first type of vessels. So the first type of vessels, we are taking the references of ISCOT. For oil tankers, we are looking into two types of common toxic gas, benzene and hydrogen sulfide. So if you look into the chapter 1.4, look into benzene. So if you look into cargoes that contain benzene, so crews should use detector tubes to check benzene concentration to determine if it is safe or for exposing the workers during the operation, such as loading and discharging. So the crew itself should ensure that the space within the OEL, so the operators should refer to the flag state or the national authority to confirm the applicable OEL for benzene. For the cargoes containing the hydrogen sulfide, so hydrogen sulfide, many crude oil comes out of the well, usually comes with very high level of hydrogen sulfide. So, but the stabilizing process usually reduces the level before the crude oil is delivered to the tankers. So the crew itself has to monitor using the gas detector tubes or similar equipments to monitor the hydrogen sulfide level, if necessary to monitor high concentration using the tube itself. So these are the example of the guideline, either from the OSHA or the Singapore Workplace Safety General Provision. So whether what to use, which kind of guideline in terms of the limits, the OER limits. So if you are looking into the OSHA, for example, for benzene, the OER limit is actually 1 ppm for 8-hour shift, very similar to the benzene 1 ppm for the PEL 8-hour shift. So in this kind of aspects, if you are concerned whether because you're docking to different countries, different national authorities may have different kind of limits, do check with their limits. But if you're looking into detection, the tubes itself, for example, usually the tubes comes with a limit where you can measure from low range to a high range. For example, for the benzene, we do have a lower range where it should cover most of the limits requirement. For example, the benzene 0.25. So the benzene 0.25 can measure from 0.25 to 2 ppm. Similarly to hydrogen sulfide, we do have a very low detection range from 0.2 ppm. So if you look into these two tubes, for example, we have a dual scale tubes. So what do you mean by dual scale? So the tube itself will have two types of scale. One is actually the high concentration, one is actually the low concentration. So when do we use this range? Because for example, the contents or the enclosed space, the workers are not aware the concentration level. They need to know what kind of when to use the upper concentration, when to use the lower concentration. So the general rule of thumb is that when you take measurements, usually when there is a high concentration, the first stroke or the first few stroke will have discoloration. So if you look into the dual tube system, dual scale system, right, majority of the higher concentration will require less number of strokes. And for the lower concentration range, the number of strokes is more. So the volume of the air required for the lower concentration range requires more. So if you look into the application wise, so if there is a discoloration in the first stroke, it means that the concentration in the space should belongs to the higher range. So that's where the workers should observe the higher range strokes. So next we look into other vessels. We look into oil tankers, offshore vessels, and chemical tankers. So we look into the toxic gas. So under the ISCOT chapter 12, there is actually one guideline regards to the tank cleaning procedures. So tank cleaning procedures, tank cleaning chemicals itself, right, may introduce toxic gases. The workers who actually use these chemicals should make known to any applicable OEL. So need to refer to the SDS of the chemicals being used for any known hazards. For example, chlorine can be found in those chemicals that used to wash the tank. So you can actually use chlorine tubes to detect the concentration at the environment when it's clean. Next, you look into the chapter 21, where it's actually very important. You look into communications. So over here, we look into how to ensure safe operation between the terminal and the vessels. So communication is very important. Therefore, during the operations such as the pre-transfer operations or the preparation of loading cargo and bunkers, the responsible officer, the RO, should inform the terminal of any toxic components, if any, on the cargo itself. Likewise, the terminal should provide any information regards to the toxic components of the cargo itself to the responsible officers, so that they can prepare any required protective equipment or respiratory equipment before they do the operations. So next, we look into the containers and cargo ships. We look into the fumigations. So over here, we take the references of IMO 1264. So over here, we look into the fumigation. Fumigator in charge officer have to ensure there's gas detection and respiratory protection equipment when they are doing fumigations. So they have to check the appropriate locations that have been fumigated. So when fumigations take place in a transit, they have to monitor at least 8-hour interval or more frequent during the voyage. So the fumigator in charge officer, usually when they need to prepare the adequate supplies of equipment such as the gas detector itself, they should know the kind of fumigants they need to monitor and detect. So if the fumigant is known, they can use the correspondent Dräger tube. For example, that we so quite commonly for the fumigations, methylene bromide and phosphine. So this, let's say if the fumigator in charge officer know that they need to monitor this fumigant, they can use the corresponding tube to detect these two common gases. If the fumigant is not known, this is probably at the terminal side. If the fumigant is not known, we do have a simultaneous kit. This simultaneous kit itself can test and measure up to 5 fumigation at the same time. So looking into the guideline of over here, right? This is where our tubes will help you in terms of meeting the safety aspects of the gas measurements. So next, let's look into the pump system itself. So before we go into the pump systems, I would like to do a poll question so that at least we know whether you use any correction factor or not. So the poll question is, do you know that correction factor need to apply when using the hose to take sampling? So let me raise this poll question out to the audiences. Wow, the poll is coming in. Thank you everyone for participating. Let's give another 10 seconds. Okay. Oh, the poll is coming in right now. Let's give. We have 70% people voted. We still have 30%. Okay, let me close the poll. Let me share the poll result. So thank you everyone for participating these poll questions. Yes, there's no right or wrong answer to this question itself. So yes, you need to apply a correction factor when using the hose to take sampling. Why? Let's say if you're using a manual pump, you require to apply correction factor when you're using hose 10 meters and above. So let's say you're using a hose that's 3 meters or less, you do not require to apply any correction factor. So there's also cases where you're using the automatic pump. The automatic pump, you are using automatic pump, you don't need to apply any correction factor. Yeah, so let me hide the poll. Thank you everyone for participating in this. So let's go to the next topic. So over here, we are going through to two product itself. We have manual pump, the Accuro pump, and we also have the automatic pump XZ5000. So the Accuro pump itself, the design is meant for simple operations. So if you look into the exterior side, there are two areas that the users need to take note. One is actually the end of stroke indicator, and another one is actually pump stroke counter. So that the later part of the webinar, I will go through how to do this single stroke itself, and probably from there you will see how easy to use the Accuro pump. So next we look into the XZ5000. So Dräger XZ5000 is actually the X-approved automatic pump system. The key principle is the electronic pump control for using Dräger shortened tubes and to perform sample taking with sampling tubes and systems. The pump control provides the required flow characteristics of the Dräger shortened tubes. So compared to the Dräger Accuro pump, this new concept reduces the average measuring time of the Dräger shortened tubes with those that's with a high number of strokes. So for those customers, right, who are already using our XZ5000, so if you are looking into new XZ5000, you will probably see some differences. So for the new XZ5000, there will not have any label for warning in terms of laser, because the new XZ5000 will not comes with a laser scanning. So laser option will not be available. Therefore, there won't be any warning for the user in terms of laser. So right now the users, right, still have to do manual adjustment on the number of strokes. But excuse me, the XZ5000 itself, we only have 3 buttons, so it's for the users. They just need to go through the basic training in order to use it. So the product itself is still very friendly, user friendly, and still very easy to use. Next, we look into the pump system, looking into the extension hose. So if you are using the extension hose that's 10 meter or 50 meter, using the Accuro pump, you are required to apply a correction factor. Why? The reason why is because the volume which convey with each stroke, although it's not changed, the volume will not change, but the flow characteristics may subjected to change. So some tubes itself, when you're using 10 or 15 meter hose, will you still required to apply a correction factor. But for those hose that's 3 meter or less, no correction factor is needed. Let's say if you're using in for sampling distance that's more than 50 meter or 30 meter, you can use SF5000. So the key advantages of the SF5000 is that SF5000 reduce the measuring time for the tubes, especially for those tubes with high number of strokes, like 10 to 15 strokes. And then when they're using sampling distance for up to 30 meter with the extension hose, after measurements, they can read the tubes directly without applying any correction factor. So this is the key advantages of the XF5000 itself. So over here, I think this is also one area that I want to update the current customer as well. So if you look into the summary of the pump system, our manual pump, so the key differences between the XF5000 is that the pump mode is actually one is actually manual, one is actually automatic. But if you look into the extension hose itself, the Accuro pump right now, you can use extension hose up to 30 meter. So 30 meter itself, we are able to provide a correction factor, and currently we have a limited range of tubes for 30 meter hose. So for 30 meter hose itself, for the Accuro pump, you have to ensure that the hose itself has to be used correctly. The pump number we will provide as well, because the extension hose for 30 meter, we are using a very small inner diameter of the extension hose itself to ensure that the whatever correction factor that we apply is workable, and actually it's been tested by our R&D side. So moving forward, our list may get extensive. We may update our list as well in terms of the correction factor for the extension hose. So for the Accuro pump, for the table of the extension hose correction factor, you can always refer to the IFU for the correction factor in the extension hose itself. So with all that, the XF5000 itself is still very advantageous if you're comparing to the Accuro pump in terms of the taking measurements. Using a high number of strokes, it reduces the taking measurement time. At the same time, for extension hose itself, you don't need to apply any correction factor. So this is the warning that we want to share as well, because I think a lot of customers is also asking us whether they can or not interchange the pumps and tubes. Although the pumps itself, the volume of air is still the same. But interchanging of Dräger pumps and tubes with other manufacturers is not recommended. It's not permitted according to OSHA regulations. The reason why is each Dräger tubes contains a very sensitive reagent systems that produce accurate readings when the technical characteristics of the gas detector pump precisely match the reaction of the reagent system in the tubes. Therefore, the gas detector pump delivered the correct volume must also pull the sample through the Dräger tube at the proper rate. The Dräger tubes and the pump are designed to be harmonized. They are being designed and calibrated as a single unit. Therefore, you cannot interchange the pumps and tubes with other manufacturer. We cannot guarantee the performance as well as the measurement using the other brand itself. So next we look into the Aerotest systems. So Aerotest system is something probably new to some of you, because Aerotest system is where not really seen in market. But if you look into the application wise, Aerotest system is actually quite relevant to the shipping industry. So Aerotest system itself is actually part of Dräger Tube portfolio. So before we go into what is Aerotest systems, I just want to share with you the application. So before we go into the Aerotest system, let me share with you about the use of the breathing apparatus, and this leads to the Aerotest system itself. So what's the use of the breathing apparatus? So the use of the breathing apparatus, right, usually used where workers are at risk of being exposed to unknown concentration in an enclosed space, or when the OEL, right, the exposure limit are likely to be exceeded. So usually when the worker are equipped with a BA set, they are actually to protect themselves from the risk of atmospheric hazards. But with that in mind, there are also hazards coming from the contamination in the air they breathe. So breathing apparatus that being recharged in the vessels using the compressor might introduce contaminations. So if you look into the ISCOP chapter 10 under the self-containing breathing apparatus, if the users suspect any time that the equipment may not be operating satisfactorily, they need to exit the space immediately. So when the users experience any odor or experience any dizziness, this is where the contaminations in the air they breathe might be contaminated, and also the hazard must be above the certain limits. That's why they experience some discomfort. So under the IMO itself, if you look into the IMO circulation 1432, under the revised guideline of maintenance and inspection of fire protection system and appliances, under the chapter 7.8, if you look into the breathing apparatus, so over here they did mention that you need to check the breathing apparatus air recharging systems. If fitted, you need to check for air quality. So over here, there are several standards in terms of air quality. We have EN 12021, we have CGA G7.1, we also have Australia's standard 1715. So for example, let's look into the EN 12021. So this is actually the European standard. This standard is actually to guarantee the health of the worker and as well as the quality of the breathing air. So why do they measure these substances, these contaminations? First of all, there might be contamination in the breathing cylinder. For example, the carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide in a compressed air might comes from the compressor. So carbon monoxide is actually a product of incomplete combustion, and some compressor have oil-based lubricants that can heat up and produce carbon monoxide. So why do we test all these substances? So for example, the carbon monoxide itself, it should maintain at below 5 ppm. A higher concentration will cause headaches to the users and will cause dizziness. Even in a higher level, it might even result in loss of consciousness and even death. So other substances like gas itself, like the oil, the presence of oil in the air supply will contaminate and damage the breathing apparatus. Even for the water vapor in breathing air is not dangerous to the wearer, but concern if free water is able to form, and which could result in internal corrosion or freezing the valve that might lead to malfunction of the equipment. This is where the Aerotest systems comes in. So we do have a wide range of the Aerotest systems. We have the Aerotest Alpha, we have Aerotest Simultaneous HP. So the Aerotest Alpha itself is used in a low pressure compressed air supply system, usually in the offshore vessel. But if you look into other vessels, most likely they are using high pressure compressed air supply system. This is where the Aerotest Simultaneous HP comes in. It can actually manage to check the air quality in the system to up to 300 bar. So if you look into the right side of the application diagram, the Aerotest kit itself is very easy to use. There is no external, there's no electric equipment inside. There is actually all mechanical. So you just need to use the adapter inside the kit itself to connect to the air recharging system and then insert the tubes. And that's where you start to do measurements. So what do you see in the kit itself? So in the Aerotest systems, what you will see over here is the whole entire kit comes with the adapter with 200 and 300 bar. This is actually the simultaneous HP kit. Inside the kit, you also have the radius reducer and also the connecting adapter. So what you see also, there's a Dräger tubes. This Dräger tube itself is very different from the tubes that you use commonly, like for example, the carbon monoxide. This tube is actually meant for high pressure. It's being calibrated for high pressure, such as those are used in 300 bar compressor. So if you are going to refill this tube itself, which ensure that you purchase the correct Dräger tubes, because the tubes, if you are using the wrong, but although it's the same as carbon monoxide, but if you're using the wrong one in the Aerotest system itself, the tubes may not perform as per intended to use. So under this Aerotest kit, we do have this adapter. So the simultaneous, so for the simultaneous HP, it can detect up to four measurements. So unlike the Accuro Pump systems that require strokes require sampling volume, the Aerotest systems adapter itself, individually, they have the fixed flow rate, and it's designed to work with the tubes listed in the tube holder. And with this adapter, right, it just requires the length of test time to take measurements. So if you look into the adapter itself, it's listed with indicating those tubes to be inserted. For example, the CO. So let's say if you are inserting this carbon monoxide tube, you need to ensure that the tubes is inserted correctly into the correct tube holder. The reason why is because the adapter itself, I mentioned earlier, is actually designed that provide a fixed flow rate. So for example, if you are taking a measurement for air quality in the recharging system, for example, 5 minutes, so during these 5 minutes of time, this adapter provide the required volume to the tube itself to ensure that the measurement it can take place after 5 minutes. You can read correctly based on the contaminations if occur. So let's say this is the benefit at a glance for the Aerotest kit system itself. So for the Aerotest kit, It's very easy to use. It's always ready to use. So the operator doesn't require any special knowledge. It's just like using the Dräger tubes itself, Dräger tubes and pump. So you just need to get yourself familiarized with the system, and then you can use it immediately. So there's no power source necessary because everything is all mechanical connection. There's also adapter in the kit itself, so that for you to easily connect to the recharging system. The results is also shown immediately. So when you measure the air quality, the air recharging system, let's say for example you take 5 minutes the measuring time, the result will show immediately. So for those kit itself, you have to look into the instruction manual for the Aerotest system. You provide a table in terms of measuring different tubes itself. But for the Aerotest kit, supported HP itself, you can actually look based on 5 minutes measuring time. You will be see most of the result out. So this is a summary of the Aerotest kit for the shipping industry. So for the shipping industry, let's say if you are a concern in terms of the air quality of the breathing apparatus, especially during the recharging systems, you can use the Aerotest kit itself to check the quality of air to see whether is there any contaminations. So if there is no contamination, you can put as a record itself. So to ensure that you are able to meet certain standards in terms of air quality check. So this is something that we want to share to the shipping industry because this is quite a relevant product, especially in terms of meeting a certain guideline. So last but not least, we are taking into the taking of measurements and reading the tubes. In this section itself, we will look into how you're going to do the pump strokes and what you should do before you do the pump stroke itself. And then there's also how you should read the tubes. So for those new users, you probably will take this opportunity to know how you can use the Accuro Pump, how you should read the tubes. And for those current users, there are a lot of questions that's being asked to ask how they should read the tubes. So in this section itself, we will let you know how you should read the tubes, especially for those faint discoloration. So Accuro Pump, before you do any test, I think this is our recommended. You need to do the leak test. So this is a very important thing to do the leak test. This is to ensure there's no leakage with each stroke. So the volume of air taken in from the Accuro Pump is correctly within the specifications. So how do you do the leak test? So first, you need to insert an unopened Dräger tubes into the socket and squeeze the pump completely and release. So the pump itself, right, when it's leak proof, the end of stroke indicator will not appear after 15 minutes. So if the end of stroke appear within 15 minutes, there is some maintenance you need to do, like for example, cleaning the exhaust valve in the tube, the pump itself, or replace the exhaust valve. So what is the recommendation in terms of frequency? So for example, prior to use or on a daily basis, and let's say if you are going to take measurements very frequently, and also you don't want to take too much time, you can actually do the 1 minute leak test. So the 1 minute leak test is the same procedure as a 15 test, just that the pump must remain squeezed and not move for 1 minute. So for the 15 minutes, when you squeeze and release, during these 15 minutes, the pump will start to revert back to the original position. But during the 15 minutes, it should not revert back fully. But for the 1 minute, it should not move at all. So for the 15-minute test, you can actually do weekly. So this test should be done as a minimum. This is to ensure that the pump itself is in the proper operation, is actually meet the proper requirements. So next we look into the counter. So before you take any measurements, this is highly recommended to do counter reset so that the users, right, when they do the pump strokes, the counter, the strokes they do, the number of strokes they do is correct. This is very important for the Dräger tubes itself because if you accidentally do additional strokes for the tubes, additional volumes comes in, especially for the low concentration, the measurement may not be accurate. So if you look into the breaking the tubes itself using the Accuro Pump, we do have two areas that you can use to break the tips of the tubes. We have a ceramic cutter, we have the metal tips breaker. So when you use a metal tip breaker at the bottom of the Accuro Pump, just to take note that might be a hazard in terms of breaking the glass tubes. It will cause gas tip to chip off and fly, and it may cause injury. So if you are using the tube opener and tube ceramic cutter, you should be eliminate those risks. Then the direction of the tubes. So it's very important to know that the direction of the tubes, when you insert into the socket for the Accuro pump, you are inserted in the correct directions. So the direction arrow should point towards to the pump itself. And then when you want to take the complete strokes, you just need to squeeze, and the end of stroke indicator is black when under vacuum. So that's why when you release, the end of stroke indicator should turn white. It signifies the completion of one single stroke. So this is where our Accuro pump is very easy to use. To take one complete stroke itself, you don't need to require any further action. You just need to squeeze and release and ensure that the pump will try to take in the required volume, and then you will see the end of stroke turns white. That's why you start to see if you need to do a second stroke depending on the tube itself. So reading of the tubes. So there are three scenarios over here. I think the first scenario, A, is very straightforward. The discoloration is very clear, it's very dark. You just need to read the end of the entire length of discoloration. That's where the concentration is. But for the diagram B, this is where a lot of customers are asking us how to read those faint discoloration. So for the diagram B itself, you need to read the tube in sufficient lighting, not under the direct sunlight. You can use paper and then use the unused tubes as a form of comparison on the discoloration. So you can use the unused tube, put side by side, and then use a lighter background and compare to the faint discoloration. That's where you probably were able to identify the end of point of the weakest discoloration, and then you read at the end of the whole entire discoloration as a form of indication of the concentration. For the diagram C, is actually quite straightforward. If let's say is the discoloration is actually on the diagonal, you read at the midpoint. So for more information, you can always refer to our instruction for use, because our tube itself, when you send to you, they always come with this instruction for use. So for those tubes come with special design, special system, like for example, two tube systems or the Ampoule tube systems, you probably will have additional steps required before any measurements. So that's therefore for those kind of special design on tubes, you can actually look into the instruction for use. If you are unclear, you need more information, you can also come back to us, and we will be able to advise you on that. Next, we also have this very powerful Dräger Voice website. I urge everyone should use this website. So this website is actually located in our main Dräger website. So this Dräger Voice, the moment you key in toxic gas, it will provide you a range of detection. Let's say if you're looking for gas detectors, either portable gas detectors or tubes, you can actually look into this Dräger Voice. But this Dräger Voice itself, not only the detection, they also provide you a range of products that's relevant in terms of this chemical hazard. For example, the masks and filters, or even the chemical suits. So if you want to look into those complete solution in terms of protection and detection, you can also use this Dräger Voice website. So before we go into the quiz itself, I just want to share there's a new product that we're going to launch in next year, very early next year. So we have this SF7000 that we're going to launch early next year. So what is SF7000? So SF7000 is actually our gas analyzer. So it's actually meant to design to measure the very low concentration. So this is actually the product itself. I just want to share the features in a glance, just a brief understanding of the product itself. So if you look into the design, the product itself is actually very easy to use. There's only 3 buttons, so it's very easy operation. This XS7000 is using micro tubes. So there's actually at the bottom, there's automatic drive where you can insert the micro tubes. And then the XS7000 will detect the RFID, and then they will start to do a pre-check on pre-setup before the measurement take place. So the measurement that provides is lab quality measurement. It uses very high technology in terms of chemical sensors and camera. And this XS7000, one of the key things is that you actually can use your current accessories, for example, the Accuro pump and the extension hose, to do any confined space measurements. So this is something that we will launch in 2021. Early 2021. So when times come, we probably will share more details about the product itself. And then if you are interested in keen, you can actually approach us and we can do a demo. So now we go into our questions. So I hope that everyone know the answer, because the question itself is very simple. And this is a premium that we will hope to give out to the correct participants, the correct answers. And just to let you know, right now these questions, these premiums will give out only to our customers. So for those Dräger staff, if you are inside the attendees and you are answering correctly, unfortunately we are not able to give you this premium. We only give this to our esteemed customers. So are you ready? So let's look into to the first questions. So the first question, there's only one question actually. Do you need to apply a correction factor for the automatic pump XF5000 when using hose up to 30 meter? So I think we probably will see some answers based on the question side.
I guess, Gus, you need to let them know that, yeah, they have to type in their answers in the question box.
Yeah. So you can actually type your answer in the question box. Yeah, I see some responses from various customers, and thankfully I think we do see some correct answers. Thank you so much for participating in these questions. We will definitely reach out to you to provide you this premium. Yeah, more answers will come in. Yeah, unfortunately, we are limited to this premium itself. So I think we are on time. Right now, we have some time for our Q&A session.
Okay, can everyone hear me? August, thank you very much for the great presentation. I think today although it's basic uh, principles of the Dräger pumps and tubes, and also some information of the new devices, the XX7000. But we think that this is also a time for you to raise questions, and we do have quite a number of questions today. So if you have any more questions as we go into this Q&A session, please feel free to continue to drop those questions in the question box. And in case we are not able to answer all your questions today due to time constraint, rest assured we will respond to your questions separately via email. So, okay, to start with, Agus, one of the questions that's been raised is, can the 30-meter hose pump unit be used for manual pump, and what hose correction can be applied? I think you have brought that up just now, but maybe you could reinforce. I believe this is referring to the Accuro Pump.
Correct. So for the Accuro Pump itself, we come up with a new extension hose 30 meters, and this extension hose itself, the design and the inner diameter is actually very small. So you have to use this extension hose in order for those 30 meter, and then there will be a correction factor to be applied. So with that in mind, right now we do have a limited range of the correction factor for the tubes, but we also will try to expand the list for more and more tubes to be added for the 30-meter hose. So for right now, if you have a 30-meter hose currently, do let us know the part number so that we need to check whether if this hose itself is approved to use for 30 meters for Accuro Pump.
Okay, I think this involves a bit technical part numbers that we will provide so that to make sure that you get the right information. There's a similar question about the correction factor. If we use the extension hose of 12, I believe it would be 15 meters, and where we can find the factors.
So currently, all the correction factor for the Dräger pump itself comes from the extension hose instruction for use. So if you are looking into the extension hose instruction for use, right, in the appendix there is a table of correction factor for 10 and 15 meters. In future, we also include more, especially for the 20 meter and 30 meter as well. Yeah. For those customers who are unsure where to find, to let us know, we can actually approach you and send you the information.
Okay, I think we can provide that information to everyone. I think this is useful information,
Yeah.
especially for ships that are using 15 meters. Of course, as what Agus has mentioned earlier, the XZ5000, the automatic pump, will actually eliminate the need to use correction factor. Should you use the XZ5000? Okay, there's a general question here, but I guess we will answer that. I'm not sure on the strokes requirement for the toxic tubes. Um, Kindly advise the guideline. Actually, I can just answer this straight away. All the Dräger tubes instruction for use does indicate the number of strokes, and in fact, on the tube boxes, sometimes they give us some guidance. So every pack of Dräger tubes comes with the instruction for use, and with that you can also take note what the number of stroke required. And I think on the tube itself, you also indicate the number of strokes required.
Yes,
I
correct.
hope, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Yu, for answering this. There's also one thing that I forgot to mention. The number of strokes itself indicated on the tubes. Let's say if you look at the tubes, there will be an N, and then the N, there will be a number beside the N. So this is where you see the number of strokes required for the tubes itself.
Yes, okay. Going on to the next question, I think just to let everyone know that today's sessions is recorded, but then the slides that's presented by Agus will be shared with all attendees. So we will send out to you respectively. Okay. Let me move on to the next question. Agus, maybe you can just clarify for gas sampling in the steam gas flow line. Agus, how to capture the best reading and trap the gas? Question mark. Or flow gas to alternative flow, etc. I'm not sure this is the correct application, Agus.
Yeah, in this application, because there is a positive high pressure in aspects as well as certain characteristics that we need to take note. But I think for this case itself, let's say if you're looking into the entrapments of the gas, let's say if you're looking into the flow gas to alternative flow, probably that's where you probably can take the sampling point. So in this aspect itself, there are some cases that there's T connection that you can look into where you can draw some samples out to do measurements. So as long as you are not taking the direct flow from the steam gas, you can actually do a sampling. But this just to take note on the sampling of steam gas to ensure that the temperature itself is not too high, because some gas detector tubes, they have some restriction in terms of temperature as well as humidity.
Okay, thank you, Agus. Another question asked, but this is more an economical questions about tubes application. Do you have a gas detector which measures most of the chemical toxic vapor commonly carried worldwide? Well, it's mentioned here, and I will read it very frankly. Our participants say that Dräger tube is expensive. And logistic issue is another problem. Again, maybe Agus, you would like to answer this question, or the tube, perhaps on the cross sensitivity also.
Yeah. Okay. For example, let's say if you're looking in for a gas detector that can measure most chemical and toxic vapors commonly carried around the world. Unfortunately, the gas sensors itself, I think in the first point where I shared the difference between the gas detectors as well as the tubes, the gas sensors, the range of detections is limited. And then let's say if you do have a need to measure a certain exotic gas, the gas sensor, due to the cost sensitivity, it may not able to measure as well. So in these aspects, you need to know the type of gases that you probably need to measure. For example, that you carry worldwide. So looking into this example, you need to ensure that the kind of gases that measure will not have any cross sensitivity to the sensor itself. For example, let's say if you are using H2S, so H2S sensors might have some cross sensitivity to the probably phosphine gas. So this cross sensitivity may cause a sensor poisoning that may create future problem in terms of the sensor accuracy and sensor measurements. So need to know the gas that need to measure, because this cross sensitivity is a big issue as well. For the tubes, I think tubes, whether it's expensive or not, I think I'm not too sure how to answer this, but for the Dräger tubes itself, Dräger tubes, one of the reason why tubes is still commonly used in this area is because of the selectivity aspects. So the tubes is actually can be used to select, can use to measure all type of gases, and in some cases where there are cross sensitivity, that the gas detectors may not able to measure, because they have sensors in the gas detectors that may have cross sensitivity to the current measured substances. So this is where you can probably use a tube to do a spot measurements.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Agus. Okay, we have a few more questions. We'll try to answer all before the time is coming up short. When we use the Aerotest kit, trust we can give up with the need of air quality test from shore for BA compressor. You want me to read the question again, Agus?
Okay. So okay, I think I saw the question. So when you are using the Aerotest kit, the Aerotest kit I shared earlier is to check the contaminations in the compressor, the contamination levels. So if you are referring to the Aerotest, the air quality test from the shore, from the BA compressor, right? The Aerotest kit may not be very fully comprehensive in terms of the certification required based on local. So you need to ensure that based on the local requirement, whether the air quality check is sufficient in terms of the values that you measured, the range of values that you measured is sufficient in terms of the local requirement for the air quality standards. But if you are looking into the current EN standards or the CGA standards, right? In terms of the substances that we are measuring, these are what we measure, and ensure that the value itself is within the air standards quality. So if you talk about the air quality test from the shop, if let's say if there is external test required, to let us know what kind of external test, then we will see whether it makes sense, whether the Aerotest kit should be used, and you should give up your air quality test with from the shop itself.
Okay, maybe I'll just add on. Yes, in some ways, the Dräger Aerotest kit, the Simultan HP, if the crew are trained how to use test kit, you can actually perform the air quality test on board. If like what Agus has mentioned, the kit that we have complies with the air quality standard under EN 12021. 12021 is actually generally quite acceptable standard, unless for some reason for American flag vessel they may require to comply with the US standard under grade D standard, then that may be differ. But we do have similar test kit to comply with the US market if that is a requirement. So you all can let us know should you have this need to comply with the US standard grade D air quality standard. Okay, moving on quickly. The next question I think is important. Can we use sample collecting bag to collect the gas from the cargo tank, which is under pressure, and test sample using tubes?
So if you are using the sample collecting bag to collect the gas from cargo, right, you can actually use the tube itself using appropriate accessories. So if the bag itself, let's say if there's some pressure, in this handbook, you actually provide a formula for positive pressures. There should be a correction factor need to apply. But if you look into the normal sampling bag that collecting the gas sampler, gas itself, you can actually use the tubes to do the measurements using the Accuro Pump.
Okay. Ken, I think I probably have room for one more questions here. Is that let me pick one of these questions. How about the temperature restrictions to store the tubes in good condition, maintaining chemical properties intact?
Okay, for our Dräger tube itself, we do have a storage condition to store the tubes. So the high temperature is not recommended when you use to store those tubes. So if you're referring to a good condition, maintaining the chemical properties intact, I'm not sure, are you referring to the whether the tubes can be used beyond the shelf life if stored at the correct conditions? Let's say if a tubes you want to use beyond the shelf life, even you are storing the correct conditions, right? No, you can't use those tubes because if even though the tubes itself under the correct storage condition, let's say it's beyond the shelf life itself, we do not recommend to use those tubes because the chemical agent inside is really aging, and we are not able to confirm the performance as well as the concentration they provided is quite accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Agus. Another question. Maybe I'll just add on a few more questions. Another question is that is the gas mixture emitted by the automatic pump during sampling could pose a hazard to operator?
The gas mixture emitted by the automatic pump sampling could pose hazard to the operator. So the using XF 5000, the
Yes.
gas outlet is usually facing towards the not towards to the user itself, but towards away from the user. So the pump that taken in from the XF 5000 is actually the gas, the volume of air taken from the space where the pump that brings in. So if you're taking the ambient concentration or ambient measurement, this is where the air itself is actually still where you are breathing. But if you're taking the air from the enclosed space, to ensure the proper use of the XF 5000, where the users will take measurements and where you should place the XF 5000 away from the user, especially to the gas outlet.
Okay. Can. Okay, we have we try to answer another question here. How to determine the right range of stain tube for use? I think the question could be asking about the how do we know what tube to use for and what measurement range? I hope I've interpreted the question correctly.
Yeah, I think probably that's the question as well. So, for example, like what I mentioned earlier, so let's say if you are looking into a range of measurement range and you're not too sure which range to apply, so you may want to look into those dual scale type. So those dual scale type will offer a lower range and an upper range. For example, the hydrogen sulfide. So the hydrogen sulfide that I shared earlier have a dual range. It has the 2 ppm to 20 ppm as well as 20 ppm to 200 ppm, I think. So these are the dual scale type where you can use you are not too sure where you should use the right range. So but what I shared earlier before, the general rule of thumb when you're using the dual scale is that when you're taking the first strokes of the first few strokes, right? Let's say there is a discoloration during it occurs during the first few strokes, you need to stop immediately because this is where the high concentration take place, and you need to observe the high concentration range of the strokes required. Yeah.
Okay, if everybody is still okay, I actually got some more questions that come in. We will try to clear them. If you all can just stay on for a few more minutes. Okay, Agus, there is a expiry date on the Dräger tubes. What will happen if we use the tube beyond the shelf life? Or can we use the tube beyond the shelf life?
Okay. Dräger maintains every batches, right, for regular quality testing. So to maintain our quality standards and validity of the tube itself, so let's say if the tube is used beyond the recommended shelf life, we might not guarantee the performance of the tube itself. So if you have tubes that have very limited shelf life left, please use the tubes immediately. Do not use those tubes beyond the shelf life.
Okay, I hope we answered the question. Another question, in the enclosed space application, we use gas detector most of the time. When do we know if tubes are suitable in such a case?
Okay, the function of the tubes itself is actually for spot measurements. So the Dräger Tubes is to monitor the occupational health exposure limit, such as the STL or the OEL for EL shift, based on the wide range that's available. For example, let's say if the gas detector may not be able to detect a certain toxic gas, probably that's where you use the tubes. But then again, the tubes is not recommended for confined space check and monitoring because it doesn't provide you any form of alert and warning. Uh, for example, let's say if you are using for to enter the space, it's not recommended because it doesn't provide any warning. Gas detectors should supposed to be used in the enclosed space in terms of continuous monitoring.
Okay. Another question here. When the tubes are being broken and used, can we keep the tubes as a form of record for the measurement? So we want to keep a record. So would that be possible, Agus?
No, the tubes might be sensitive to the moisture or the temperature, as well as any cross sensitivity to other contamination that it might expose. So it might give you a false reading. There might be a potential little, depending on the type of toxic gases, right? Which may be carcinogenic. But you can actually use phone to take photo to take a record, or you can actually try our Dräger app, Tube app in Dräger Play Store, not Dräger Play Store, so Google Play Store or the Apple Store. This Dräger app itself, you can actually put in the Dräger part number, and then you can actually take photo and archive. This is where you can take a record for any measurements.
Yeah. So Agus, maybe we can add it in your slides, how they can make use of these Dräger Tube apps.
Correct.
Okay. Can maybe just two more questions. Can we reuse the Dräger Tube for the next measurement if there's no discoloration? Can we
No.
reuse the Dräger Tube? Yeah.
No, because the tips are broken, it has exposed to external environment. So the external substances might trap in a pre-layer or indicative layer. So that may disrupt the chemical reaction that might affect the discoloration. Therefore, the concentration might not be accurate when the tubes is being broken and being reused.
Okay. So advisable not to reuse, right, Agus?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, maybe I answer with these questions. Some claim that the PID detectors, photoanalysis detector, is an alternative to detect chemicals in a cargo. Though it may not be easy to calibrate the device on board, would that be a better solution than to use Dräger tubes? Agus?
For the PID sensors detectors, right, it's really depending on the intended use. So let's say if it's used for personal monitoring, gas detectors, right, with PID sensors should be used instead of tubes itself. So the PID sensors, right, is used to detect volatile organic compounds, and it can actually can use to detect a very low range. So the sensor, although it will need to be checked and calibrated between the intervals, and calibration probably require some training to ensure that it's probably be done and checked. And also at the same time, you probably will need to require consumables such as the calibration gas in order to maintain the calibration for the PID sensors. But for the tip itself, the intended use and function is different. So let's say if you are looking into spot measurements and the tubes is able to serve the kind of intended use, yes, you can use the tubes. But if let's say if you're planning to use for spot measurements, as well at the same time for personal monitoring or continuous monitoring, then you will probably need gas detectors with the PID sensors.
Okay. Okay, then we have to end the session due to time. But rest assured, there are some questions that came in. We will respond accordingly through email, and I will now hand over the closing session to Shaw Ping.